Hello, my name's Shercliff, and I'm going to be leading about 10 short 5 to 10 minute sessions helping us to think Christianly about the pandemic, the virus, COVID-19. I'm going to be using this book, Walter Brueggemann's Virus as a Summons to Faith, as the basis of much of what I say, and I do recommend it to you as a very good read. But I'm also going to be wandering off that particular book and bringing in some other ideas from elsewhere. So don't expect me to be just reading through the book. The title of this series is called Thinking Christianly About the Virus. And today's session I've called a Transactional Covenant. This month, July 2020, Dave and I will have been married 40 years. Had we had 2020 vision back in 1980, we might have delayed the wedding for a year and not had to celebrate our ruby anniversary during lockdown and such a period of uncertainty. At our wedding, the preacher chose as his text Psalm 1. And in verse 6 the psalmist writes this: "The Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish." It's a straightforward transactional interpretation of the covenant between God and God's people. If you're good, I'll bless you, and if you're not, I won't. It's a theological position that's mirrored in much of what's been said about coronavirus, it seems to me. We hear echoes of it in comments like, nature is stopping humanity in our tracks, or we are the real virus. But what does the Bible have to say about this virus? How might we think theologically about the pandemic? I wanted to take some tentative steps toward thinking about the present situation as Christians. Please don't think that this will be the last word on it. I simply hope to offer some early thoughts, a way of setting out our faithful task as church to understand where we are through the lens of our Christian faith. So let me lay out a framework for some of the things that I want to say. Firstly, I believe in a God who suffers with people, not one who somehow sits above us, inflicting purposeless pain. Secondly, I believe in a God who is mystery rather than rationality. Thirdly, I believe in a God who constantly reaches out to people over and over again. And fourthly and finally, I believe that the story of the God in the Bible develops. Our image of God grows over the pages of the book and over the pages of history. In fact, in some ways, I think that the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, is God's story of humanity, while the New Testament is humanity's story of God. What we're setting out to do in these sessions is not easy, and it will take several sessions to get from where we are to where we hope to end up. So stay with it. Today, I want simply to begin with the idea of the transactional covenant that I introduced at the beginning, and to see it as a theme running through the Old Testament. Don't worry, it's not necessarily where we'll finish up. We can find this transactional covenant in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, books of the law, and in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, books of the prophets. Let's read a little bit from Deuteronomy. "The Lord will make the pestilence cling to you until it has consumed you off the land that you're entering to possess. The Lord will afflict you with consumption, fever, inflammation, with fiery heat and drought, and with blight and mildew. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall be continually abused and crushed." That's taken from Deuteronomy chapter 28, between verses 21 and 34. The cause of all this suffering is given in verse 20. You have forsaken me. In other words, because the people had forsaken God, they were going to suffer from pestilence and fiery heat and drought and all those other things. Jeremiah adopts a similar quid pro quo. When some prophets say, you won't see the sword or have famine despite your disobedience of God, Jeremiah just condemns them as false prophets. Rather, Jeremiah himself condemns those who are destined to pestilence, those who are destined for the sword, to the sword, those who are destined for famine, to famine, and those destined for captivity, to captivity. So plague, sword, and famine are cast as instruments of divine punishment against those who violate God's covenant. Does that mean then that, as Richard Dawkins proposes, God is jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty, capriciously malevolent bully? Well, I don't think so. The conviction that suffering will follow the breaking of God's law springs not from the nature of God, but from the nature of God's creation. The Bible begins in Genesis not with an explanation of how the world came to be, but how the world came to be as it is. There was, remember, no witness to the events right at the beginning of time. Genesis was written for the Jewish people either when they were in exile in Babylon or just after the exile, and it was an attempt to try to understand what had gone wrong, why things were as they were. And the assertion in Genesis is simply this, that God made an ordered world. And this idea of transactional covenant through much of the rest of the Hebrew Bible goes like this. God made an ordered world, and when we break the order, when we break the divine order of things, then the world will go wrong. And that is an idea upon which both religion and science agree.